With 13 Lancers to choose from in Season 1, Chapter 1 of FragPunk, there's a ton to learn about every Lancer in the game. And I've been grinding since release to get familiar with every single character, and working with some awesome members of my Discord to compile the best tips and tricks so that you can get the edge on your opponents and climb your way to Punk Master. My name is Artie, and I'm a full-time professional esports coach and commentator. I'll also be casting the first ever official FragPunk tournament, the Shroud vs. 10's FragPunk Showdown on Twitch Rivals. So if you like FragPunk and you like esports, it would mean the world to me if you hit that subscribe button. You know I like to keep these intros short, so let's go down the list. Let's start off with Broker. If you didn't already know, if you throw a smoke on a burner, it will actually put out the fires. But for Broker, the smokestack lightning does not put out the burner fires. So you can layer these up to make sure that you can take some really good space. Next up, you can angle your smoke slightly upwards to create instant one-ways anywhere on the map. Cherry Bomb is really useful to prevent teams from peeking doorways if you're on defense, but on attack, you can also use this on post plant. You can also see where Cherry Bomb is going to land by looking at the little lineup marker on the minimap. And finally, you can switch to your rocket much faster than you can switch to your sidearm, so use this to get the advantage in a fight. Now, let's look at Nitro. Chug Chug moves faster than Broker's cherry bombs detonate, so if you do see Broker with their cherry bombs out, you can just drive Chug Chug through a cherry bomb deployment to clear them up. You can use Nitro's turrets to peek corners. The range is a little bit further than you might think, and it's going to cause enemies to either have to turn around or move their crosshairs to take out the turret before they shoot you. So either way, you're going to have an advantage when you take a fight around a corner. You can use Nitro's walls to build platforms to hold off angles or peek over cover. This is probably the most broken strategy that you can use for Nitro in the entire game, and there are tons to uncover. I highly recommend hopping into a custom game where you can just go to map practice and find all of these angles yourself, both on attack and on defense. Chug Chug can actually third-person peek, so even without getting your drone in harm's way, you can figure out if somebody is around a corner before you peek it. And finally, Mr. Pew Pew can actually be hidden inside of leaves and other soft textures, but you can get really creative with the turret placements to make sure that when people come around a corner or come through a doorway, that they're gonna have a pretty hard time. Shout out to Fuzma in my community for helping me out with Hollowpoint. Fuzma is a top 50 Hollowpoint player in my Discord server, and he decided to help me out with this one, so take it away.
Hi guys, my name is Fuzma. This is tip number 1 for Hollowpoint. Always have one trip either holding the second entrance to a site or holding your flank if there's a character that likes to rush down mid and try to get a flank on you. So, but you still have one left if you need it. Tip number 2 for Hollowpoint. Her walls actually scan and reveal enemies, but they're also really good for isolating enemies. What I'd like to do is I use her wall, scan this angle because enemies can hide. Then as I push up, I will turn to my left, throw my other wall. Now if you hit F, you can stop the wall, you isolate this fight, free kill. Tip number 3, once you get a site and you plant the converter, use one of your chip mines to hide it inside the bomb or right next to it, because the bomb ticking will actually cover up the sound. The enemies won't really pay attention to that. And then you can use your other one to say like hold a choke right here or hold them pushing out a doorway.
Thanks so much for those tips, Fuzma. Now, for tip number 4, this seems obvious, but start every round with Meteora first. The one-shot potential of this character is amazing, and you should be taking every advantage that you have. Last up, if you find yourself in a tough spot, your smoke screens will always be able to pinch enemies out. Either enemies are going to be forced to be revealed, or they'll try to skirt the side and run away from it. Either way, don't underestimate the pressure that a well-placed smoke screen can apply. Now let's talk about Jaguar. You only have one use of I Can See for miles, so try to only use it when you can pair it with your other abilities. But remember that enemies will only be wall hacked when they're inside of the cage or when they're taking damage from the mine. Electric Avenue goes 20 meters forward. Cages are 5 meters by 5 meters, and it only makes one cage at a time. You can see these cages through walls if enemies are hit by them, so you never have to guess if the cage landed or not. It's really useful to pair Electric Avenue with burners or blasters to either force people back into the cage or to guarantee damage when they're trying to escape it. Jaguar's Livewire is actually the most damaging trap in the game, so use this to watch your back and do not underestimate how much damage this thing can do. I Can See for miles reveals enemies within 10 meters, and it also grants you wall hacks on any enemy that is under 50 HP. Now let's talk about Chum, and let me say this, before I made this video, I really underestimated how good Chum was. But since looking into all these tips and trying to figure out how to best play him, I can tell you that Chum is probably the most broken Lancer in the game. Let's talk about why. First up, Chomper without bait will hold an area and he'll reveal any enemies who he chomps at. Next up, Chomper with an explosive bait will actually follow you and he'll attack enemies within 7 or 8 meters or so. A nice pro tip is that the smoke bombs will actually put out fires from burners. Next up is 2 tips in 1. Chomper with the smoke can actually be driven. You and your team can actually sneak up inside of the smoke with Chomper and have an insane advantage on the enemies. Combine this with an additional Chomper with explosive bait following you, and you're gonna have an insanely good time hitting any sites. The last tip is that you can actually stack your leftover mines on the same spot. A mine will do 75 damage, so if you stack 2 mines in one area, if an enemy trips it, either trying to defuse or trying to plant, it's gonna do 150 damage. Let's talk about Corona, and I'm excited for this one because I am a top 100 Corona player. First up is use fast lane as a super jump as well to clear into height or jump over objects. Enemies are not going to be expecting you to pop over the top of cover. Next up, time your fast lane and hothead to flash at the beginning of your dash, not at the end. You can line up with a little gold bar that appears to make sure that you know exactly when your flash is going to hit every time. This is a helpful tip that I didn't know until recently, but hothead only blinds enemies within 10 meters. So if you're against an enemy Corona and you keep finding yourself getting flashed, try to hang back a little bit. But for Corona players, if you know that enemies are going to be a little bit further back, use your dash to try to get as close as possible to guarantee that the blind will hit. This next tip might seem obvious, but I see tons of Corona players getting it wrong. Ashes to Ashes gives you damage reduction. So you can use it as a molly, or you can use it as an area to guarantee that you're going to have an advantage in any fight that you take. And lastly, you go way higher than you do forward with your dash. So a 45-degree angle on the dash is going to get you the most distance rather than just charging in flat on the ground. Serket has a lot of depth to her kit, and to be honest, Serket is one of the characters that probably has one of the higher skill ceilings in the game. You can stop her smoke tornadoes early to make them stationary smokes, and when you do, they get way bigger and cover a lot of distance. You can actually use station to station inside of Serket's tornadoes to make her even sneakier. Pop out of the tornado to have a great advantage on the enemies. Dilemma is really powerful to prevent enemies from holding inside of an angle, so pair this with a burner as well to get some insane damage. Even if you don't use station to TP, it still acts as a really useful scan, since you can see how many enemies are in an area and where, and just cancel the ability instead of committing. Finally, use a flasher or have your team use a flasher before you use station to station. You're not going to get flashed inside the ability, and you'll have a huge advantage coming out of it. Let's talk about Pathojen, and there's a ton of stuff that people surprisingly still don't know about her. For example, your heal grenades stack, so you can heal faster by placing both at the same time. The second tip, her wall immediately starts absorbing damage as soon as you start the animation, not after the wall is actually put up. So you can use this as a get out of jail free card, or you can actually use it to peek an angle and get free information. Next up, you can actually activate Killer Queen as a molly as well. So if you're scared someone's gonna shoot it, detonate it anyway, and that way you have that as an option. Another big tip is that the molly is actually gonna deal instant damage if the enemy is in range, even before the animation triggers. Her molly won't deal damage through walls though, so be careful with your placement. And a bonus tip is that Pathojen is immune to poison damage, so if you see an enemy Pathojen's mines, don't forget that they don't really matter to you. Now let's talk about everybody's favorite invisible character, Zephyr. Fade away can be thrown while you're invisible, so to get the most out of the invis timer, go invis first and then pop your fade away, not the other way around. Another good tip is that you can use your get back TP while you're invisible, both placing it and also TPing back to it. So make sure that you're making the most out of this if you're ever in a sticky situation. One tip that I love to give people that I don't really see many people using is that you can play Zephyr kind of like Spider, in the sense that you can TP with infinite range and play on 2 parts of the map at once. Place your TP on A and hold steady on B. Another pro tip is that if you have a Sonar on your team, use Silent Step with the invis to get a great run up on the enemies. And lastly, remember that Zephyr has 3 uses of the invisibility. You don't always have to be extremely aggressive with your invisibility. Pop it and peek a corner or look down a lane before your team hits a site or gets overwhelmed, and just use Zephyr as a free way to get information. This one's gonna be exciting for me as well because I am also a top 100 Spider player, and I've been having tons of fun with this kit. The first tip is that you can see where your Spirited Away ability is going to land by looking on the minimap. And you can still TP teammates with Spirited Away, but they have to accept the teleport first. So if a teammate needs to get out, just tell them to press F the moment that it lands and they'll come back to your safety. Another big tip is that you don't have to just stand next to your TPs to pull them away. You can recall your TPs from anywhere on the map. So if you want to play smart, put 2 TPs into 2 areas where you might want to TP back to. If you need to go somewhere, pull one of them and then teleport to the other one. This is huge, but a lot of people don't know that your kidnap actually tells you if you got an enemy or not. Look for the icon, and if it's flashing and glitching around, that means that someone is coming. And another tip is that if you are going to be getting an enemy coming out of that TP, you can guarantee a kill from your Spirited Away every single time by using your melee. Don't waste time just trying to get the shot. Just make sure that as soon as you throw your TP, you're ready to get the knife kill. Alright, tons of people do not understand how Kismet works, so let me give you a few really good tips here. Kismet does not make any footsteps inside of the invisibility, just the glass noise. So don't feel the need to hold your walk key while you're in the ability, just go as fast as possible. Speaking of that, coming out of her wild side ability is loud, but if there's a team fight going on, people are really unlikely to notice. Speaking of going super fast, bunny hopping while running is the fastest way to move while using the wild side ability. So make sure you're making the most of this movement tech. Another pro tip is that you can see where the Misery Angel is going to be landing by looking at the minimap. And another huge pro tip is that Kismet can actually grab the converter while in Walk on the Wild Side. So if the converter is somewhere where it's really difficult to reach, Kismet is the best person to go and grab it. A huge tip that I only found out recently with Axon is that you can slide and swap weapons immediately. So even though you can only slide with his guitar, as long as you're swapping weapons, you can technically slide with everything. Axon's grenades stick to enemies, but they bounce off of walls. So if you can guarantee that you're gonna hit an enemy with it, his grenades can be super oppressive. His ability Super Freak makes you immune to blinds, but that also includes your own blinds. So take flashers with you or have your teammates flash for you and slide into a room for maximum efficiency. Your shotgun is better at close range, so use grenades to force enemies to get closer to you. If you're not using flashers, use blasters or burners to try to court enemies into the area you need them. Alright, this is kind of a cheesy tip just to hit number 5, but if you want to get really good with Axon, play deathmatch or scrimmage with his shotgun as much as possible. It's going to allow you to get a feel for the effective range of his shotgun, as well as work on the timings with the sliding in his weapons. And last up, let's talk about Sonar. Sonar's silent step ability is obviously great to be able to clear distance really quickly. Don't drop this ability the moment the round starts. Instead, use it after you throw a Sonic Surge or after your echolocation reveals an enemy to push up on them quickly without them having any audio cues to react on. Sonic Surge not only exposes enemies, but it also drops a wave that knocks back enemies who don't move. So if you use your echolocation, then hit an enemy with Sonic Surge, they'll get double revealed by the echolocation since they have to move out of the way of the wave. That wave also will expose any enemy that's hit by it, not just the original person that got hit. Echolocation on its own isn't that useful since enemies can stop moving before the ping hits them, but enemies will likely try to not play in this area anyways. So pair it with a Zephyr who's invisible to peek, or with a Nitro drone to check angles as well. Or you can pair echolocation with blasters or burners to guarantee that enemies have to move out of the way. And the last tip is that you actually have to charge up her Sonic Surge. If you just hit the ability, it's not going to go very far, but you hold the ability and charge it up so it goes the maximum distance. So, did you learn something new about your main? Did I miss any tips that you've discovered? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you made it all the way to the end. I'll be live on Twitch and YouTube every week, grinding my way up to Punk Master on FragPunk, so be sure to tune in and join my Discord server. We have a pretty active LFG channel if you want to find some friends to grind with. Thanks so much for watching, and don't worry, you'll see me around.